Morning, everybody. Michelle is here. Michelle is here on this Sunday, July the 5th, 2026. And I'm sure not many of us got sleep last night with all that fireworks going on all over the world, all over the country. People celebrate. Well, I don't know if they were celebrating or they just wanted to create a disturbance with noise. You never know anymore. It's just about, doing whatever. I want to come back and make some corrections on my topic of the pending extinction of the mediocre man. Why the mediocre man is going to have a similar fate as the Neanderthals, but not exactly. It's not exactly the same realities. The realities of the Neanderthals are much, much, much different than the realities of our current population. The so-called modern times. I told you that the Neanderthals went extinct as well. Well, let's put it this way. The majority of the Neanderthals went extinct. There's still a residence or residue or structure components to recognize that some of us have Neanderthal in our as part of our DNA. In other words, there are still descendants of the Neanderthals that are still alive. Okay, they're just not thriving as they were. And they say that the Neanderthals went extinct like 40,000 years ago. I don't know, because a lot of our history is false. A lot of our history is manufactured. And so chances are we have no idea what happened. When it involved the Neanderthals, it says here, let's go back to that again. Oh, let's see. It would help if I can if I can spell. All right, so they said it's an extinct group of archaic humans who inhabited Europe and Western and Central Asia. Okay, and their extinction occurred roughly 40,000 years ago. Okay, that is what's said in these dictionaries. I don't think anybody really knows, but that ought to be a concerning factor when humans go extinct. There's a difference between being wiped out, where a climate destruction comes through and wipe out humanity. Okay, that's a climate destruction. They wipe them out. But chances are there usually is always survivors. And so the survivors will start the process over again from their ancestors. Blah, blah, blah. Now that ought to be concerning, right? That these humans went extinct. They and they have a lot of scientists, attempting to figure it out, and they always romanticize every goddamn thing. These scientists, they always want to romanticize stuff. There's nothing romantic about humans going extinct. What's romantic about that? So, the thing I want to keep in mind, is that it's where these Neanderthals were, and what happened to them. Okay. Again, our scientists really don't know, and let me get to this out of Africa theory, because it's nothing but a fallacy. That's a fallacy. Okay, we did not come out of Africa. None of us. We settled in Africa. Some of us. know the difference. Was Africa created during the Neanderthals? Was Africa created during the conception of humans? Okay, so let's just be clear and effective about what we're saying and avoid the confusion, because there's so much confusion. We did not come out of Africa. Some of us settled in Africa. Okay, by the time some of these so-called humans were procreated, Africa did not exist. Okay, pay attention to what we are attempting to justify and what we are attempting to create as far as our history is concerned. The math has to add up. Okay, disregard Africa altogether. Disregard Asia altogether. And tell me what you come up with. Okay, so that's a fallacy, saying that we all came out of Africa. Figure it out. Okay, we did not. We settled there. Some of us settled there, and mostly the dark races settled in Africa. Settled. The dark races were all over the planet. They just so happened wanted to settle in the region of what we call Africa, the continent of Africa. All right, so the Neanderthals. Why did they go extinct? Okay, they said inbreeding, depression is what they're saying. Animal attacks. A lot of it, in my opinion, was lack of development of their consciousness. Now, what does that mean? Some people just like to stay as is. They don't want to progress at all. They want everything to stay the same. They don't want to change. They want the same positions. Whether it, and let me also make another correction. When I said that we are making catastrophic mistakes by mixing, what I meant by that is procreating. You can have sex with anybody you want on this planet. Okay? The fatalities that we are creating are procreation. Okay, procreation, thus adding to the massive overpopulation. Okay? So, do your research on the Neanderthals and ask yourself, now, why would a human race go extinct? And tell me, why wouldn't it happen again? Why wouldn't it happen again? Okay? So, I'm just kind of, going through all of this. And they said something about the inbreeding. Let's go back to that again. What do they mean by inbreeding? Okay. Well, inbreeding ought to be clear and effective. And again, the issue is not the sexual interaction with each other. It's the procreation. Understand what that means. Sorry, but apparently there's some allergies going on outside. Also, with all that, all those fireworks from last night, created a fog in the atmosphere. That's considered pollution, by the way. And it created a mess. I don't know what. I feel so bad for the animals, especially the birds, to have had to experience that. So here we go again with this. They're always attempting to bring Africa into the mix, when it really has nothing to do with nothing per se. Because did Africa exist during these times? No. During the Neanderthals, was Africa existing? Make sure the math adds up. Make sure it's logical. Make sure everything you're attempting to teach people is logical. I'm talking to the scientists too, by the way. Yikes. So, Now, again, when the Neanderthals went extinct, there's various reasons as to why. But tell me this, why wouldn't it happen again? Okay. I sense, because of the lack of willingness to evolve your consciousness, meaning to look at ways to advance your thinking and understand what your roles are, what it means to be a human being in a true sense. A lot of people, especially the biological man, I told you, they're becoming so soft, meaning they don't, and that has nothing to do with their sexuality. They want to do as little as work possible. I can remember, this is decades ago. Don't worry about my sweating. I'm sitting in my vehicle waiting for something to happen, and then I'll get out of the vehicle and go handle it. I can remember, I think decades ago, when people were in an uproar, couples were in an uproar over who's going to take out the trash. Does anybody remember that? How men were literally up in arms about taking out the trash. Now, in our family, what usually happens, and it's logical, if my dad was there, he put out the trash. If my dad was not there and it was time to put out the trash, my mom put out the trash, or my brothers, or myself. That became a hot debated issue about men taking out trash. The men were just up in arms as to why they need to be the ones taking out the trash. So it became a softness, whereas they want to do as minimal physical duties and responsibilities as possible. Now, if it involves sports, which most of them were only spectators, that's something completely different. They have no issues being spectators of sports, not participating per se, but spectators, sitting there, telling other men supposedly how to play the game, and they had no idea how to play the game at all. That still happens today. These stadiums are filled with these men who have no idea how to play the game, but they're so critical of those who are playing the game. They're spectators. They know how to run track better than the track stars. They know how to be. They are more of an athlete than the actual athletes. Constantly criticizing this and betting on these kind of things and being commentary and analysts. It's I don't watch sports anymore because of the analysts. Okay, because a lot of them were mediocre at best, could barely play the game, were injured all the time, whining and complaining all the time, barely played, as I said, barely knew how to play, barely could compete. That's a lot of this. It says something about the Neanderthals and competition. Okay. The extinction of the mediocre man did not just happen recently. This has been building up over decades, over millennia. As I said, the biological man has become soft. He is infertile. A lot of them are infertile. And so I would say the majority of couples are using IVF. They're using the in vitro fertilization. They are not naturally procreating, because if the woman were to become pregnant, she would miscarriage. And I can remember listening to some women speaking, they miscarriage almost 5 times. That's what's worse than miscarrying 5 times or having an abortion 5 times. Is there a difference? Okay, so we're going to have to speak on these critical matters and not get so offended when people attempt to snap us out of our trances and get us to wake up. We are on the verge. And okay, it's so 40,000 years ago is not really long when you consider everything else that happened, with the inception of what happened and what's happening to us. 40,000 years, can very well be 400 years or even 40 years. And you don't think that extinctions can happen in 40 years? Okay, so these are the things that I want you to critically think about and understand why we have this softness in biological men. I want biological men to be honest, brutally honest with yourself, and ask yourself, what is your fear? Because that's the root of it as well during the modern time. What is your fear of competition? Okay, what bothers you about competition? What bothers you about advancing and evolving your consciousness? Okay, and this over masculinity, which is a fallacy, because there's no such thing as a overly masculine man, because I told you they're soft. They have this outside appearance, though. They have this outside appearance of being overly masculine because they have all these muscles. Let's clear this up here. Yeah, they have all of these muscles. They can walk around. In such a grotesque fashion. Okay, and that look is only attracted to them and people that participate in those type of activities. Like I said, wrestling, MMA. Okay, and I'm talking about usually the spectators of that. The spectators of wrestling. That's a mediocre man. They'll sit there, like I said, and criticize this man, criticize that man, and believe that they could do better, and they can barely wipe their ass properly. And that's literal right there. And you have this need to blame biological women for the development of the softness of a biological man. The biological woman is always to blame. That's why it's going to be so important for the biological women to separate from the biological men for safety and protection of themselves and their children. Okay, they have to be in separate areas of the world if necessary, and the man is not allowed to be there except on certain occasions, and that's going to be a vetting process. They will not be able to live in the communities with the women and children, but they can definitely visit. That is the reality. And the same thing is what I meant about mixing of races of people. There's nothing wrong with socializing. When I say we are creating a fatality via our medical development, is when you're mixing races for procreation. Procreation is the key. Pay attention. You can have, like I said, you can have sex until the cows come out. You can have cows. You can have cows. You can have sex until you can't. The issue and the fatalities that we're creating via medical research is when we procreate, because they go in there. I told you the biological male sperm is tampered with. They go into these laboratories and mix something up into these formulas and insert it in the woman. It's not happening naturally. Okay, I would say 85% of the time it's not happening naturally. And that goes across all races of people, because the overpopulation is affecting everybody on this planet. Okay, but as I said, this parts of this planet is going to be wiped out via climate destruction. Usually there are survivors, and then they regenerate. When you go extinct, you don't regenerate. Okay, when your lineage dries up, that's the end of it. There is no more procreation, because that species or category of humans have gone extinct. I hope all this makes sense. I know it does if you're thinking critically. No one has to know what you're thinking about. Just think about it nonetheless. Understand what's happening and how you can stop this process now.